Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Sunday, January 21st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game is in 223 days. The game against Michigan in 314 days. Ohio State has made some changes. There's some news. There's been a lot of news in the Ohio State football world the last couple of days. We've kind of brought you the news on this show the last couple of days and on the Buckeye Weekly podcast. Now we're going to dive into a little bit more of what is it actually going to mean moving forward? And when we want to find out the nitty gritty of, the schematic side of things, we talk to Buckeye Huddle's X's and O's guru, Ross Fulton. He is one of our many scheme guys on the board. He helps make our audience smarter football fans every day on the Huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse. And when Ross is on the show, we also are presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, proudly offering nationally acclaimed U.S.D.A. prime steak, seafood and sushi, impeccable service, live entertainment, and an attention to detail that is simply unmatched. Go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to learn more, check out the menu, and make a reservation today. All right, Ross joins me now. Ross, Bill O'Brien. This was not a universally popular choice among Ohio State fans, but there was a certain subsection of people that kind of pointed at him and went, yes, that's the move. Absolutely. I think one of the disconnects maybe is people looked at him and, his offenses have sometimes been good and sometimes not been good. But I think the first question when we're talking about Bill O'Brien is, when he comes to Ohio State, is he running the Bill O'Brien offense or is he running the Ryan Day offense with some input from Bill O'Brien?
Yeah, obviously remains to be seen. I think it's going to be the latter. That would be my assumption. Ryan Day has put a lot of effort into developing and organizing his offense. I can't imagine that he's just ready to chuck that aside. Yes, they do have differing schematic backgrounds, I guess you would say. Bill O'Brien has been traditionally more of a West Coast guy, or at least that's where his lineage is, whereas Ryan Day, I guess you would say, is sort of a mix of some air raid concepts, some like Shanahan-esque play action vertical concepts. But, I feel like Bill O'Brien at Alabama didn't run like a West Coast offense, that term is somewhat lost its meaning even in this day and age. I think he continued a lot of what Alabama has been doing since Lane Kiffin. So I personally think it's going to be Bill O'Brien running Ryan Day's offense with obviously his input and probably some, enhancing it, I think is the term that, Ryan Day and Urban Meyer before that like to use. And so I think, there may be some changes around the edges, maybe some changes in the run game and emphasis. Obviously when it comes down to 3rd and 6 and you need to play, they could have different thoughts. But like, again, Ryan Day isn't going away. Like he's going to have a headset on. He's going to have input. I'm sure they've talked through this marriage and how it's going to work. But, I think that for Ryan Day, it's even beyond just like, I don't think he necessarily thought he needed to change the scheme to help him. I think the things that he wanted help in are organizationally and both internally and on game day.
So when you mention, he may be enhancing things, where do you think Bill O'Brien might be able to enhance the Ohio State offense? What is Bill O'Brien? You mentioned West Coast offense, obviously, but that's a pretty broad term. I'm assuming they're not bringing Roger Craig back and Tom Rathman. So, what is Bill O'Brien like known for as a coordinator, as a play caller? What are some things that he does well that might enhance the Ohio State offense this year?
Yeah, a couple of things I think I would be looking for. Maybe these are areas where I just sort of think that there's some room for growth. And so maybe that's, coloring it. But I do think these are things you've seen with Bill O'Brien. I think the first thing I would point out is in the run game. I think more of a diversification, more of gap schemes, more downhill. One thing that'll be really interesting is Bill O'Brien's always liked to use 12 personnel or so, 2 tight ends, 1 run back. Which Ryan Day has always liked to use also. Now, I will say roster wise, I would say the tight end group is the weakest on Ohio State's roster. And we've talked about the blocking issues from that position. So that'll be interesting. But I think you will see more of, pistol, downhill, gap scheme run game from O'Brien. He's not really a stretch guy like Kevin Wilson was. He's run it but I don't think it may not be as much of an emphasis. But I think it's like there's one thing that's like the X's and O's. There's another thing like the execution, like just with like you, you hope that he brings in having someone else there who is in charge and organized can make sure the execution of the run game in terms of like offensive linemen getting to the second level, how things look get cleaned up. But that's one area. Another one I would put in there is going to the West Coast point. Quick game. I think there's obviously New England Patriot concepts that we've seen forever that he saw at Alabama. Like why stick? Like very simple. 3-step drop type routes. That has not been again. That's like not been something that Ryan Day's used much of. I mean, we see occasional like double slants. There's some of it, but I do think that's an area where there could be some enhancements. Things that help move the chains in the passing game, and I do think that there'll be probably some. He could bring some more RPO flavor as well, but I think again, sort of more variety of that, more consistency. But again, we'll have to see. It'll be an interesting meshing because you're both meshing their concepts, and then obviously what Will Howard could do well, and I think the Q run game is an element of that. Bill O'Brien did have Deshaun Watson in Houston, but obviously Ryan Day also has experience with Q run game.
Talking about doing more downhill running with Ohio State having not just Travion Henderson this year, but also having added Quinshon Judkins in the portal from Ole Miss. Is there one of those guys that you think maybe is a better fit for the stuff that O'Brien likes to do on the ground, or is this just kind of you can tailor it to whoever is in the game at that point?
I think both. I think it probably would benefit Travion Henderson more because I think that he is a better downhill gap runner than he is like zone runner. Particularly stretch. I think Judkins can do both of it. I've seen him do all the above, and he's pretty versatile that way. But I do think that it would probably maximize Henderson more to be able to do more gap scheme run plays.
All right, and so the scheme part is one part of this decision, and the addition of Bill O'Brien. The other part is something that we've talked about a bunch over the last month or two, and that is they kind of needed to bring in a veteran play caller to just kind of fill what was the Kevin Wilson role for a number of years. Wilson left for Tulsa last year, and they didn't really fill that sort of veteran play caller guy. Does Bill O'Brien fill those Kevin Wilson shoes? And if so, why is that an important addition?
Yes, I think that's the key thing is that he better. I guess even more so, right? Because I presume that Bill O'Brien's going to be calling the plays, whereas Kevin Wilson obviously had a big part of collaboration with Ryan Day, but ultimately Ryan Day was calling the plays. I just thought that they were so light upstairs during games. Just in terms of having eyes, both just in terms of experience with who they had upstairs and just the sheer numbers. They only had like a couple guys. And so I just thought that was a huge weakness. It's hard to see everything on the field and to not get input. Ryan Day just didn't felt like had someone up there that had the gravitas that he could trust for what he was seeing last year. Like obviously he relies on Keenan Bailey a lot. But I just think that they've just really missed that presence and, someone who can be a bit more detached. And it just, I think it's less that like Ryan Day is a bad play caller. I think he's a good play caller. It's just you have a lot going on the sideline that he needs to be responsible for. And so just being able to take some of that burden off of him, I think should help on game day. Not to mention like, we can talk about like during the week and like the organization of the offensive staff.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, this is something we've talked about this a bunch of times over the last month or so, but the moment when Eli Drinkwitz was sitting at the pregame press conference 5 feet away from Ryan Day talking about all the wonderful things that giving up play calling allowed him to do at Missouri last season, and Ryan Day sort of sitting there listening to it with this like blank look on his face, not reacting in any way. It feels like not only during the game day when it might free you up to be able to not have to be doing 3 things at once, but just being able to be a CEO, being able to glad hand and shake hands and kiss babies with donors and all the other stuff you have to do as a head coach. I mean, this feels like that might have an even bigger impact during the week, during the off season, than it does on game day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first parts of what we talked about, like how they mesh up scheme wise, how Bill O'Brien does calling Ryan Day's offense, assuming that's what happens, like that, those are remain to be seen, right? Like we'll have to see. But I do think like what undoubtedly is improved by this is like the organization of the staff. And like, Ryan Day had to both be the head coach and essentially like the middle manager of the offensive staff, right? Like you had a bunch of young guys, and I laughingly say young because they're all basically my age, but our age, but they didn't have sort of like a veteran presence on the staff who could be in charge, right? So like Ryan Day has to be responsible for the position coaches. And like now, most people can relate to like an organization you're a part of where like now Bill O'Brien can manage the rest of the offensive staff and Ryan Day can then manage Bill O'Brien. And so that takes, instead of him worrying about 5 or 6 guys, he's worrying about one guy, right? And like he doesn't need to be in every meeting, like Tuesday after practice, breaking down every offensive snap from that practice. Like, I don't want to suggest, I feel like people think this is like an either or, right? It's like, oh, well, now Ryan Day gets to go out and raise money all the time. Like, I'm sure as a coach, like, I know Ryan Day realizes he needs to do that. That's probably not why he got into coaching. Doesn't sound as fun. Like, Ryan Day's not going to like go away from the offense. It's not going to be the same. I don't think as Jim Knowles with the defense, right? Like, I still bet Ryan Day's in most of the meetings. I bet he spends a lot of his time during the week working with Bill O'Brien to determine the game plan for that week. He's going to be on the headset during the games. Like he's going to have veto power, like all the things that Urban Meyer did, right? Like Urban Meyer didn't call the plays, but like he was heavily involved in the offense. But it just saves him like he can go do other stuff. He doesn't need to have the clicker in his hand pointing out, did we block power rate on a Tuesday rep? Like Bill O'Brien can handle a lot of that. Bill O'Brien can then go to Justin Fryer, the offensive line coach, the wide receivers coach, et cetera, and be like, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And so again, it takes a lot of burden off his plate organizationally so that you're not doing essentially 2 jobs at the same time.
Well, this is just one of the ways in which Ohio State feels like it's addressed some of its shortcomings from the end of last season. It has been quite a month of January. This is not normally that busy a time now that most of early signing day takes care of the recruiting. This used to be a busy time of year. It has not been a busy time of year for the last few years. This year, holy smokes, has it been a busy time of year in Columbus, Ohio, with NFL draft guys returning for another season and transfer portal additions and coaching staff changes. Also, that means it would be a great time to be a member of BuckeyeHuddle.com, where we've been talking about a lot of this stuff for weeks now, where you have access to Ross and the rest of our team of X's and O's guys, making you a smarter football fan on the Huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse. Kevin, Tony, and I covering the team, Mark covering recruiting, and boy, has that been a busy place to be as well. It is all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And once again, thanks to our friends at Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, the award-winning upscale steakhouse in downtown Columbus, named one of the top 50 steakhouses in America by Food Network. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus, check out the menu, and make a reservation today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.